Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. Really excited to bring in Ty from AudioEye. Wants to talk about today covering digital accessibility myths and kind of the challenges that are out there. We're going to give folks a few minutes to join and get into the webinar here. If you guys can let us know that you can hear us okay and um, maybe give us a little shout out of where you're dialing in here from today, so we know kind of where the representation of folks are. Might be interesting to hear and kind of chat about. And Ty, do you want to quickly, introduce yourself
Yeah,
and give people an introduction to who you are?
absolutely. Sounds good. My name's Ty Moore. I'm our VP of Strategic Partnerships here at AudioEye. Been in the game of accessibility and in this industry for going on 10 years now. So a lot of time working on making the web accessible. And I'm calling in from Tucson, Arizona. So excited to be with everyone.
Yeah. I'm here in the new Duda offices. We've recently kind of renovated our office here in Palo Alto, so I get to be one of the first people to do a webinar from this location. It's exciting. Hey, Sarah, welcome. I see you're here from Germany, which is great. I think also just another question for the audience that might be interesting of like, what is your guys' experience with digital accessibility so far today? Ty is going to cover off kind of some of the, you know, misconceptions here that are very common in the space that he sees on a day by day or week by week basis in his job. But I'd be interested to hear if anyone has familiarity either like getting asked this question from customers, B maybe having a lawsuit, C just kind of learning about it in the space. If there's anything along those lines that are that you guys kind of are seeing or hearing, might be interesting to know and have us kind of chat about it as well. We'd love to kind of engage with you. So Matt, I see you're dialing from the Netherlands, and Steve. Hey, Steve, how are you doing from Tennessee? It's good to see you. Really happy to have you guys here. So Ty, what got you into accessibility? And you've been with AudioEye for a while now. What got you started in getting into it?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. And I feel like there's a lot of these stories when you look at digital accessibility is we had a personal connection. So at the time of starting AudioEye, one of our co-founders was running a really large QR company. Like if he had his company in today's world, it would have like blown up. He was, having a company that would do like QRs to websites, QR codes to websites. And at the time, he got diagnosed with a disease in his eyes, and I was very close to him. We worked at some other companies together, and he said, how am I going to access the web if I become blind over the next 15 to 20 years? So we started looking at how to make websites accessible. At this time, is really interesting. Like 1995 to like 2010, the web was probably the most accessible it's ever been. Because it was just so simple, right? Like everything was like, very, very simplistic, not that much color contrast issues, not that much from different widgets or iframes coming into sites. And that's how I really got into it, was like that personal connection with our co-founder that had that, unfortunate disease that he's going to lose his vision over the next 15 to 20 years. But at the same time, looked at it and said, how can I make this accessible? How can I make sure that I'm going to have access along the time? So
Got it.
it's been a fun ride, and I will say it's like changing every single day, right? Like that's the cool thing about digital accessibility is like every single day there's something new, and being able to stay up with the guidelines and make sure that we're keeping websites accessible, and then also looking at the different use cases that we can get out there has been really fun for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really cool. So it's kind of come by way of knowing that the co-founder and getting into it. So hey Doc, good to see you. Good to chat with you again. Welcome. So you're calling in from Mexico. Matt Matt's here just wanting to learn more about digital accessibility in general, which is great. We'll definitely be able to shed some light on that. Matt is also asking, later can we, tell something about kind of Userway in relation to digital accessibility, yeah, we can definitely get into that. Let's save that towards the end. We'll have plenty of time at the end of this for Q&A and covering questions. So please, guys, feel free to ask those questions in the comment box. If we don't get to it immediately, we will circle back around to it. Ty has a presentation which he'll walk us through, covering kind of some of the most common digital accessibility myths. And then if there are questions that are relevant, I'll interrupt Ty and ask him, in the middle of the presentation. But if not, we'll have some time definitely at the end to do so. So please, keep those questions coming. Bring them our way, and we're happy to address those as we go on. So with that being said, Ty, let's just get right into your presentation here and covering kind of the content of today. If you want to go ahead and just take it away and, kind of, yeah.
Absolutely, sounds good. And today we're going to be going over debunking common myths about digital accessibility, and I think it's really important because there's so many things out there that I hear. Oh, digital accessibility doesn't apply to me, or I'm just making my site accessible for people that are blind when I do this, and nobody that's blind actually accesses my site. So we'll go through these myths, right? What is true? What you need to do, where's the total addressable market, and really what are the benefits that you can get when you make your site accessible. Feel free, again, drop comments in the chat, and we'll keep it as more conversational as we possibly can. A little bit about AudioEye before jumping into it. We were founded in 2005, and kind of to go back to that founder story with a personal connection to how do you make sites accessible for people with disabilities. If I'm blind, how would I access a site? If I have epilepsy, how would I access a site? When we first started AudioEye, the web was just evolving, right? We were just starting to see how can the web create independence for people with disabilities, and it's evolved a long way. We'll talk about that a little bit. At AudioEye, we service tens and thousands of clients ranging from very large organizations like Samsung. We've done projects with some of the largest websites in the world, all the way to delivering to tens of thousands of SMBs and local businesses, from home services to food and beverage to just single bloggers that say, hey, I want to make sure that my site's accessible. So we really pride ourselves on a comprehensive solution of blending in the best in great technology, also with human intervention and manual testing, which we'll talk about why it's so important to digital accessibility today. So we'll start it off first by just what is digital accessibility. I always kind of tell a story, like the first time I told all my friends and family I was working at AudioEye and we were going to go try to make the web accessible. I think for the longest time they actually thought we were like making Wi-Fi accessible, or like making it accessible for other people, not for people with disabilities. But digital accessibility in a nutshell can really be defined as the ramps and rails of the digital world. Every single day we are now transitioning and modernizing to a world where websites are just as important, if not more important, than our storefront. And with that being said, we have to make sure that we are thinking about people with disabilities. Just like when I build that building, I'm building in a ramp, I'm building in a rail, an elevator. I need to do the same thing when I'm making a website. And this just doesn't apply to websites, right? This applies to your mobile apps. This applies to your digital documents if you're doing PDFs. This applies to your videos if you're doing any type of video content where you need it to be closed caption on the sites. So that is what digital accessibility is. Just think about all the different use cases as well, which we'll talk about, but is making sure that people with disabilities have access to your digital content and your digital ecosystems. So the first myth that we're going to go over is only a small percentage of the population has a disability. This is one of the biggest ones that I think kind of shocks everyone, is that 1 in 4 people worldwide live with a disability. Now that disability could be I'm visually impaired or blind, or that disability could be I have epilepsy. But this is a wide range of disability. If you think about that, that's 25% of the total population or site visitors that come to your site that are going to have some form of a disability. And then the other one that is very shocking, and I don't want to say shocking, but very, can take it in, is that 75% of people with disabilities use computers regularly, which shows that of that 25% of the population that has a disability coming to your site, that 75% of them are going to come. They're going to be active. They're going to be purchasers if you're doing e-commerce. They're going to be people trying to get that access to information. So very large numbers that we're actually talking about here. And then not only large numbers, but also real users, right? Users that are going to come, access, and want to make actions on your site. So when we look at this, right, 1.8 billion people worldwide, 13 trillion in spendable disposable income, right? So if we think about how people with disabilities also spend and they work with organizations that are going to support them. If I have a website and I'm selling t-shirts, if my website's accessible for people with disabilities, what we can see is that you're going to have a wider range, and then also a wider range of individuals that have money, and their families are also going to want to spend that money as well. 2 out of 3 people with disabilities rely on accessibility tools and assistive technology. We'll talk about that a little bit more today as well. But an assistive technology is a technology that a person with a disability has to access a site or to just navigate, right? Some can think that glasses are an assistive technology. If I'm utilizing a keyboard and utilizing only tab structures because I can't function a mouse, that would be a feature of accessibility for me. And then 75%, again, of people with disabilities use computers regularly. Just harping on that number because so many times I hear, oh, someone that's blind doesn't come and utilize my website. Individuals that are blind are some of the best, most powerful users of the web. And it's our job and our goal to make sure that we make that web accessible so that they can create independence. I'll kind of go a little bit and tell a story here is we were working on a project for a very large rideshare app. And that rideshare app said, hey, we want to become accessible. So we did a lot of research. We looked at, how do people that are blind get to work? How do people that are blind navigate, to schedule a taxi and so forth? And understanding how much work that was, they would have to call in. They would have to make sure that the taxi was going to be there on time. They'd have to make sure it showed up every single day for work, or they couldn't go to their job. But being able to create that app, that rideshare app, to become accessible, to know that at any time they can request an app, created this massive independence. And that's really what we give ourselves opportunity to do by having digital accessibility being available to everyone, and especially individuals with disabilities, is it creates that chance or that moment in which I can create independence for myself. So really cool story. And again, a lot of the population, majority, is going to be utilizing that assistive technology.
Hey, Ty, let me ask a question here. Just, who are the users of the web that are using, assistive technologies, and maybe what are those technologies, right? You mentioned specifically keyboard as like an assistive technology to navigate and browse through the site, of using tab, using arrow keys, using enter, those type of things. Like what are the other assistive technologies that are really used on the web, and are they different on different devices? So are mobile devices different than like a laptop or a PC?
Absolutely. So the most common that you're going to hear for individuals with visual impairments is a screen reader or a Zoom text. A screen reader is a text to speech, right? So if I'm on a website and I'm tabbing, I have a screen reader on. VoiceOver is a very common one that's built into every single Mac device. Then it's going to be able to read the website to me. Something that like a JAWS as a screen reader as well, which individual that is blind or low vision is going to utilize that. Zoom text would be the same, but it's actually zooming in, right? Very easy to understand Zoom text into the website. But other things would be something like keyboard would be a keyboard navigation if I have Parkinson's and I couldn't navigate. Sip and puff, which is basically something that can navigate via tab for someone that has a disability that has no functionality of a keyboard or a mouse. Other tools around would be voice navigation. Maybe I'm using like a Dragon software or something out there that can come in and I can navigate with my voice up, down, so forth on the website. So there's a lot of other ones out there. I've even heard really new use cases, Russ, where someone would say like, hey, I utilize a color contrast changer that helps me so that I don't get migraines when I'm accessing a website. But there's so much more that we're learning. We're learning certain things like When I'm tabbing, do I have indicator focus? And that's supposed to help a keyboard user, but also maybe help someone that has ADHD navigate a site. So the use cases we're still learning. We know a lot of them. We study a lot of them, but every single day, every single week, we're learning different use cases of things that we're doing, or in the WCAG, which is the Content Accessibility Guidelines, that are helping individuals with disabilities for a certain situation.
Got it. Thank you.
Number 2 on the myth is digital accessibility is only for those people who are blind or have low vision. This goes right off of Russ's last question, right? It is for everyone. And then the other thing that I'll talk here a little bit about is temporary and situational disability, which I think is something we're doing a lot of research here at AudioEye about. Is, let's say a temporary disability would be something like I broke my leg. Well, if I broke my leg and I'm utilizing crutches or a wheelchair, for that time period, I am an individual that is living with a disability. I'm going to need to utilize the elevator to get upstairs. The ramps and rails are going to be extremely important to me. It's the same thing with the web is what we're learning today. I might be in a situation where I'm holding my baby on my right hand and I need to have the website read to me. Or I might be in a situation where I don't have access to a mouse, or I don't have access to do a certain thing. But an accessibility feature is going to be able to really help me out. So that is something that is really starting to get us in the realm of a majority of the population. If we think about something like Siri, right? Siri was built for individuals with disabilities. It was really the first use case of understanding what Siri was. But that's really another point on it, is that when you create accessible sites, you're not only focusing on accessible sites for individuals with disabilities, but you're creating a better user experience. And if we can create a better user experience, then we're going to have more access for people that are of all different abilities. Maybe I'm in a situation, maybe I have a temporary disability. I'm going to be able to learn and have better access for everyone. Now we'll get into some of the laws and some of the regulations. And Russ, feel free to chime in here. I know you know your users very well, and this is where we get a lot of questions. So digital accessibility applies only if you have a brick and mortar store. So in the United States, we have ADA Title III, which states that public places of accommodation need to be accessible for people with disabilities. That is really where digital accessibility and where a lot of the law here in the States is pointing to, is stating that websites have to be accessible because they are a public place of accommodation. Therefore, if they're a public place of accommodation, websites have to be accessible to ADA Title III. But what we've seen is that it's not just a digital accessibility for a brick and mortar store, that if I was just a e-commerce store that had no brick and mortar building, it still does apply to me. It applies that I have to have my site accessible because I am providing something that is a public place of accommodation, like a website. We're also seeing in Europe that the laws that are getting placed there with the web directive are very strong as well, in stating for anyone that has a site, you need to become accessible. You need to show that you are being inclusive to all individuals with disabilities. So that is definitely something on SMBs that I think is really important to understand, because small SMBs can't afford, here in the States, to get hit with the lawsuit or to not comply, have to redesign their entire site. It just doesn't, it won't work like that. So making sure that what you have to do, and then also really looking at this from an inclusivity standpoint.
Yeah. In the US, it's very confusing because I think like Title III, right, it says place of public accommodation, but there's never been like an official ruling of, is place of public accommodation, is it a website, is it not? The DOJ, I think, is kind of discussing making this official. So from what I've read on this, and Ty, correct me if I'm wrong here, is like it can be kind of vaguely interpreted of like, yes, I need it, no, I don't need it. Can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, you definitely do need it, right? And that's like the gray area. And the Department of Justice about 4 or 5 weeks ago came out with a statement stating, hey, websites are a public place of accommodation. So even if I have, even if I just have a website, let's say I'm going back to the t-shirt example. If I ran a t-shirt business, but my t-shirt business was all online, you couldn't come to a store, I still need to comply because that website that I have And a user that maybe doesn't have a disability or doesn't use an assistive technology can come and access the site. If I'm a user with a disability, that is a public place of accommodation, that website is, I need to be able to have access to that site. So it does go hand in hand. You don't have to have a store to have a public place of accommodation. That website is saying that that is your digital public place of accommodation.
Got it. Makes sense. And there are some countries even, right? I think there are countries that even require this as well, right? You're saying the EU is moving closer to it. The US is there. I think also like Israel also requires like all websites to be accessible out of the box. That's kind of a core requirement. Do you know of any other kind of countries that are
So
this is really important for? Yeah.
yeah, Canada is very big as well. So Canada is something that is a country with the AODA that is being very progressive with their accessibility laws. Japan has very strict digital accessibility laws as well. Australia. And the one thing I will say in the digital accessibility world that we are doing extremely right is that we are all following the same guideline. So in Canada, I might have the AODA, and in Europe, I might have the directive, and then in the United States, I have ADA. But we're all following the guideline of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Right now, we're on the 2.1 guidelines, and we are looking to publish the 3.0 or silver guidelines as well. But you are seeing everyone pointing to the same structure, which is really good. So don't get confused in thinking that the ADA is different than the AODA. Yeah, from a law perspective, it is, right, and for that, but for the actual how to make a site accessible, it's all following the same structure.
Yeah, right. The WCAG is like the standard that all of the laws kind of point to, right?
Yep, exactly.
I deal with this on the privacy side. I work a lot on kind of the privacy technologies that Duda uses, and it's all over the place from a privacy perspective, right?
Yep.
EU has one set of laws. Different states in the US have different laws. Brazil has their own law related to this. South America or South Africa has their own privacy law that's there. Even individual countries within the EU have their own distinctions on GDPR. It's a big, complicated mess, which to the accessibility side, it makes it a lot easier when there's just one standard to follow that's kind of widely accepted, which is one of the great things about the space. Yeah,
absolutely. And it gives us the ability to understand different use cases, right? Like I still think we're just scratching the surface on the different use cases that accessibility adds benefits for. I can't, every single time, and I said this earlier, that I go to a conference, I'm having someone else come up to me and saying, hey, I utilize AudioEye and I love that it helps me make my site WCAG accessible, but did you also know it does this? Did you also know that the background will help me with my migraines? Did you also know that disabling the animations really helps me to stay focused? So all these different use cases that we can have, that at the end of the day, we're just trying to do one thing, which is to create a more inclusive experience for everybody, not only individuals with disabilities, but when we say everybody, we really mean everyone, no matter what situation you're in. So this kind of goes again to Russ's point on applying only in the U.S. Website accessibility laws, although they're different in different countries, there are legislation and laws popping up all over the place. I would say again, Canada is extremely progressive right now. In the AODA, there's a fine per day if you're not accessible. So it's very, you have to meet a certain deadline to make sure that site's accessible. Australia has very progressive of laws, especially for their government funded organizations. And then the UK as well. Europe is really pushing a lot of digital accessibility as well right now with kind of the modernization program that is going on. You're seeing a lot of the organizations that are getting in that building accessibility in. And I would say also just across the board, I think a lot of countries are starting to adopt accessibility as just the right thing to do. It also, from an affordability standpoint, and I've had a lot of conversations with folks, in our leadership groups that are all over, from Nordic countries to South America and so forth. One thing that is really cool is digital accessibility gives us the ability to create an inclusive environment at an affordable rate, right? To come and say, I'm going to go to a city and I'm going to make the entire city accessible from a brick and mortar perspective, it is very expensive. I'm having to make sure every single building is up to code. I'm having to make sure every single sidewalk is accessible. Across the board, there's a lot of financial constraints that happen so that brick and mortar isn't as accessible. Like we've been fighting this for years, right? To make brick and mortar accessible. With digital accessibility, we give ourselves the opportunity to make websites accessible at a scaled rate and do it at an affordable rate, so that no business actually has the power to say, "Oh, I can't afford that." Right? Anyone can make their site accessible. It's a small investment to make your site accessible, and it's also just knowing what you have to do to make it accessible and what you need to continue to maintain and monitor to make it accessible. So that is something that a lot of the countries that we talk to and accessibility leaders are adopting, is saying, look, we want to have an accessible environment. We want to make sure that all of our constituents have access, and we can do that at a very affordable rate to create that independence as well. One more on this: digital accessibility doesn't apply if you have 15 or fewer employees. This has been a question that we get from SMBs all the time. The ADA, Title III, Public Places of Accommodation, makes no exemption for small companies. So knowing that, hey, I might just be a gardener, or I might be a landscape business that only has 3 employees, that doesn't exclude you. It actually is something here in the States we're seeing that they're attacking very, very hard, is those small businesses that don't have tons of employees, and they're saying, hey, you still need to become accessible. Your organization does, and it causes a lot of problems for these SMBs because they don't have the knowledge base to say, hey, how can I make it accessible? That's why it's so super important, and we talk with Russ all the time, to create that education with agencies and with website makers, because the SMBs are just starting to learn about this as well. So Russ, I don't know if you have any comments on this one as well, especially with a lot of the agencies delivering that to the SMB.
No, I think it's just good knowledge for folks to have, right? I think today accessibility it's a challenge that people want to do the right thing on, but there's a lot of information out there, like how to do it and how to go about doing it, and then different platforms have different ways of approaching it, right? Like a WordPress is going to attach to this differently than a Duda or a Webflow would do. So there's a lot of kind of difficult kind of translation that needs to happen for a lot of our agencies, and how do they translate that down? But I think this is just one clear point of just saying, like, yeah, I think agencies need to be guiding and recommending the best practices to their customers, and saying, hey, this really is something you need to think about and have a strategy and a plan for going forward, right?
Yeah. And to Russ's point there, I think like the big thing is a plan, right? Is for so many years we'd get stuck in this world of trying to be perfect with digital accessibility, right? And starting to say, like, every little thing needs to be absolutely perfect. I have to get to the AAA guidelines. I have to make sure that every little aspect of my site is absolutely perfect. But to do that and do that across the web immediately is impossible. It really is. And I don't say that lightly. To be able to say we're going to do everything and keep up to date is really, really difficult. But what we tell our clients at AudioEye is have a plan, right? Make sure that you're executing on that plan. Make sure that you're moving it forward. Make sure that if you have a photo that you're uploading in, you're adding alt text to that photo. If you have a form field, that you're adding the correct tags to that form field, and so forth. Having those applied and making sure that they're there will increase and add on to that plan. It's not something that is like a one and done. Accessibility is a constant journey, so you have to make sure that you're constantly evolving and thinking about it. But don't get stuck in like the black cloud over your head that's just always, hey, I got to make this accessible, and it's just too much work, so I'm not going to do it. Those small steps will actually come a very far way for the web. So number 6 is going to start getting into to some of the frivolous lawsuits. And this is, mostly around the United States, but we can also talk internationally as what's going on as well. But web accessibility requirements can be ignored because litigation is frivolous and invalid. Are we seeing an abnormal amount of lawsuits being filed? Yes, absolutely. Is there, a lot of lawyers that are here in the United States that are filing, tens and thousands of these lawsuits? Yeah. But the reality of it is that every single one of these sites or these complaints or lawsuits that are being filed is actually extremely valid. And we are seeing small businesses having to shut down their website sometimes, or having to pay a $5,000 to $20,000 settlement fee with these lawyers because they are in violation of the ADA Title III. Even in Canada, we are seeing websites that are violating AODA and really coming up on those deadlines that are really starting to get themselves into a panic because those sites are not accessible, and there are penalties associated with that. So, just because these websites or these might look like serial filers that are coming out and filing, they are very real. We are seeing that SMBs are having to deal with this left and right to make their sites accessible. And if you're a small business and you get one of these letters, do not ignore it. If one of your clients gets one of these letters, do not ignore it. One of the things for most of the agencies that we work with, that we talk to them about, is by early communication is extremely important, right? And Russ, you and I have had this conversation last week in LA. Is that if I'm an agency, I want to notify my clients about digital accessibility, because the worst thing that can happen is all of a sudden I launched a website for them, and that website was inaccessible, and all of a sudden they get hit with a lawsuit, and now they're going to point the finger back to me as an agency and say, what did you do to make my site accessible? Like, this is your fault. You handed me a liability. So what we tell our clients here at AudioEye and the agencies that we work with is be straightforward with them. Tell them about the software options that they have, the different technologies that they can apply to their site to make it accessible. Let them know the different practices they can put in place. If they're adding photos, if they're adding form fields, that they need to tag them, teach them how to do that. And then if they don't want to do any of that, if they say, nope, we're good, we're fine, we're going to take the risk, be clear in the communication, be clear in this SOW that you're signing with them, that they are taking the risk, they are taking the liability. We don't recommend that. Every single website should be accessible. But also from an agency perspective, if you are to do that, we really want you to be transparent and open before that website goes live. When accessibility is an afterthought is when users don't have access, and also that we see these litigation and lawsuits start to fly, where now that SMB has a $10,000 or $20,000 lawsuit on their plate, and they can't afford that. So being straightforward with them, being early and often in the communication, and then knowing how you're going to solve it, knowing how you're going to present it to them, with saying, you have one option to make your site accessible. This is how we're going to do it. You need one option. If you don't, you need to know that this is your liability. Again, and then letting them know, because we'll see that a lot of users, a lot of clients at that standpoint are going to say, I'm going to make my site accessible because not only it's the right thing to do, I will also need to protect myself from these frivolous lawsuits.
And Ty, I think one of the things that came to mind with you talking about this is it's not just like you don't always need just a tool like AudioEye that's going to come in and make some of these changes, right? Obviously AudioEye is a tool that can do that, but the reality is like a lot of this is just making sure that the content works. A lot of it is making sure that maybe you have a phone number so people can call in to actually access. Can you just speak a little bit more to what are those kind of things that like an agency would talk about in terms of covering? Maybe there's like the base design, and maybe there's legal, and then maybe there's like things on top of the website that you can do that's there to just kind of get to a little more compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things that you need to do for digital accessibility is have, we call it at AudioEye our help desk. Like, our help desk is based into our product. But that is a channel in which an individual with an assistive technology or an individual with a disability utilizes to access and to communicate. So any site that has AudioEye, you have a help desk there. That help desk ticket comes to AudioEye, and we can communicate. If you are not utilizing AudioEye in this case, we suggest that you have an accessibility statement page that has a separate support channel that goes directly to someone on the team that understands accessibility, that maybe is CPAC certified, which is an accessibility certification, that goes through and knows it. What we see often too many times is someone tries to put their support channel and their accessibility channel into one. And a lot of times people don't even understand how an individual that's blind accesses the site. I actually was on one with one client one time that said, yeah, unfortunately our support team didn't know how accessibility works. And they said they don't know how people that are blind access a site to someone that was a blind user accessing a site. So you really want to create that separate channel, right? At AudioEye, we do that for you via our technology. Other things that you want to do is you want to have a plan put in place. Again, not trying to plug our solution too much, but our sustainable testing and remediation plan is a plan in which we are showing you everything we're doing to get your site accessible. Because we'll be the first to tell you, automation cannot solve everything. It can't, like any organization or any company that says they can automate accessibility with all automation, draw a red flag. But in our sustainable testing and remediation plan, we show you how we're using automation, we show you how we're going to use manual intervention, we show how we're even communicating back feedback with Russ's team from a platform perspective. How do you increase accessibility from platforms? And we talk about all of that. If you're not using a solution like an AudioEye, you need to make sure that you have that plan drawn out. Show your clients what accessibility checkers are you using. Are you utilizing MVDA or VoiceOver to test the site before you launch it? Have those things drawn out. And then the last one I would say is an accessibility statement on a site. You want to make sure that you have, if you are making your site accessible, make sure you have an accessibility statement. There's a lot out there that you can get for free and build in. AudioEye comes with an accessibility statement into our solution. But I would say that that's another big thing as well. And then one other point on that I would say is, we are not only just partners with Duda from a standpoint of delivering our solution, but we're also, by delivering our solution, we're able to find commonalities to increase accessibility. So Russ's team is always working on increasing accessibility for our platform. We work with all the platforms out there. And I would say Duda is one of the more progressive platforms, in the game that are looking at accessibility and building it into the main underlying code. It's about a plan, right? We're not going to come to Duda and to Russ and say, hey, you guys got to get all this stuff accessible, every single template you ever released by the next 6 months. It's not attainable. So what we do is we look at taking it in little chunks, and working with Duda in this way has been awesome because they're increasing that platform accessibility, and which is making it so that more users are getting the benefits of this from a platform basis. This is a little bit about the numbers. Here in the United States, again, if you're delivering to clients in the US, we can have another conversation with this, follow up with Duda. We can get on a one-on-one and talk about how to deal with this. But there are so many lawsuits going out there. We are seeing SMBs getting hit in the thousands. And really, we want to help you, understand how to deliver this, how to offer it, how to make this something that you're being proactive with rather than reactive, because the number of lawsuits is only rising. And then, to say this internationally, it's becoming more of an issue as well. They're starting to build it into guidelines, a lot like what you see in Canada. We're seeing that in Europe right now as well, where, we won't see as much litigation, just the nature of how the United States works, but we will see a lot more regulations internationally, and we're already seeing that today. So now getting past the legal side, right? Accessibility is good for one is making sure your site's accessible. It's a human right, and there's a huge population of individuals that are going to benefit by having an accessible website. Two is knowing the legal, the legal realm and making sure that you're applying websites that are compliant to your customers. But then probably my favorite is also, understanding the other benefits that you're going to have, not only from a usability perspective, but accessibility is going to help things like SEO. As we see Google's looking more in, and Russ, you just gave a talk about some of the vitals in in LA. But we're seeing that accessibility is going to continue to be built into those scores, right? Because it goes so close with SEO, and the tags that you're applying are beneficial. By having an accessible website, you're going to naturally become a better SEO organization, and you're going to have the correct tags there. And Russ, I know that this is kind of your domain. If you want to chat through it, I can get into the nitty gritty as well.
Well, I think the one thing I would add here is, like yes, when you do the right accessible thing, you're applying alt text, which is an SEO thing and also an accessibility thing. I think more broadly though, but when you're thinking about digital accessibility as part of this, you're actually trying to shape the content to be most helpful for every person that visits the website. That ultimately, thinking more about what am I communicating, how am I communicating that, how am I communicating clearly in a way that anyone that visits this website is going to understand and comprehend. That is all going to help just your content perspective for SEO and trying to think through the user experience. Because at the end of the day, Google wants to send people to websites that answer the questions they have. And if you're trying to really answer and think through what's there, I think there's a lot of benefit just related to the accessible thinking of how your content is consumed and used as you're designing and as you're building the site. That's going to be what I would say is going to be the biggest impact. Yes, you can get into the technical, like we're using H1 tags correctly and we're applying the alt images and we're using image attributes correctly. You can get into those type of things and they do have an impact. But I think the broader is just the content, thinking through the actual experience of what that content is saying and what it's delivering.
Absolutely. And then also, I think as we get more modern with voice navigation, right? And this is where like our head of AudioEye is really focused on, is as we get into more voice navigation with the web, those tags are going to become so crucial, right? If I can tell a computer to do something and that computer is going to go there, that tag has to know where it's going. So by making the site accessible, which a lot of it has to do with tagging correctly in making sure that a screen reader can understand or can read it out loud from text to speech. But what when I go speech to text or speech to action? By tagging it correctly, you're modernizing and future-proofing your site to be able to quickly adapt when those technologies become more mainstream. And that's something that we're really looking in, because we don't think it's that far out. We don't think it's that far out before VR and websites are connecting together and we're navigating a website with our voice. At that point, accessibility is going to become so important for a website. So it's really just that foundational structure. And I tell people this all the time. It's like a ramp in a building. How many times do you see individuals that all of a sudden are just walking up the ramp because they know that that's the easier path? They want that. That's what they want. And it's a user preference. And that's the same thing with the web. As we create more user preferences, as we create personalization because of accessibility features, we're going to create a better experience for everybody. Whether it's SEO for you as a business to increase your SEO, or it's for just that usability and functionality to the site. Awesome. And I went out there for a sec, Russ. You got me still?
Yeah, you're totally good, man. Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. So why digital accessibility matters to businesses? One, legal compliance. We know that the legal compliance is going to help, but more importantly, that brand enhancement. Showing that organizations are accessible, that you are inclusive. The expanded customer base, 25%, 1 in 4 of the users coming to your site are going to have a disability, making sure that those sites are accessible for them. And then the improved SEO and the improved benefits of usability on a site. So I know that we have about 15 minutes. I would love to just open it up to questions, Ross, talk through. I know we have some questions already in the chat. And thanks again for sitting through today, and we'll be able to address a lot of these.
Absolutely. Let's start with one that came in pretty early from Matt. He's asking, can you guys tell something about like a Userway and their relation to digital accessibility? I think more broadly, maybe let's just focus the question on any kind of tool that you add on top of a website and kind of the relation to digital accessibility. Yeah.
Absolutely. I can jump through a lot of that. So Userway has a tool on a site that it has a plugin and can make remediations. I don't know a ton about their product. I'm not going to go down to their exact features. But one thing you want to be sure with digital accessibility is that you're not just putting a widget on your site, right? You want to make sure that you're actually applying remediations, and those remediations are conforming and meeting the WCAG success criteria. The little icon on a site, the little toolbar that can change color contrast, can change font sizes, that is not what makes a site accessible. What makes a site accessible is making sure that it conforms to the WCAG success criteria, and you got to do that by testing, remediating, and really meeting those benefits across and meeting that criteria. I think Userway does some of that as well. You have to look at their sheet, but making sure that you're not just getting the widget on is really important to conforming and making it accessible for everybody.
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned pretty early on in my learning about accessibility is the reality is that users who have a disability, they're using an assistive technology already, right? They're using a screen reader that's built into their operating system, or JAWS, or built into iOS on their iPhone, and they're not relying on those toolbars that get added to websites there. And so what Ty is saying, really making the changes to the actual site of either making sure that you have alt texts, or making sure that the heading hierarchy is in order. Those type of things are what you'd want these tools to come in and actually remediate a lot of the time. So you just want to make sure when you're adding tools that they actually are trying to go down and actually fix some of those issues, a layer deeper than just applying a button that people need to kind of opt in and use. Yeah.
Exactly. Within inside the AudioEye App Store, with Duda, we are releasing a new feature as well, which will be able to really show what we're fixing, right? Because it's kind of like the math problem back when you were in school, right? You want to show your work of how you're making it accessible. So we'll have that function and feature in there as well.
Yeah. Cool. Let's jump on to the next question from Sarah. She's asking just accessibility for screen readers. How important or how much time should we be spending on just the visual aspect of someone who might be blind or might have visual disability? Yeah.
So the cool thing about WCAG, which again I keep coming back, that's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, published by the W3C, is that it takes into consideration all sorts of disabilities, not just visual impairments, not just motor impairments, so forth. It is looking at all different types of disability. I never want to say one is more important than another, right? It doesn't. Everything, all access is equally important. But I will say from a screen reader perspective, that it's very important to know that you're working with an organization that is testing with screen readers, knowing that you're working with an organization that's actually utilizing manual intervention, manual testing. At AudioEye, we have what's called our Alliance community. Our Alliance community is a crowdsourced community of individuals with disabilities that are testing our sites. And we utilize that so that we can find all issues, right? If I built a ramp and a rail, I know that that's to code because I followed it, but also I want to make sure that I'm testing it, that I'm going through, I'm putting it through manual testing. Same thing with the website. I want to make sure that I'm doing manual testing with that site. So that's something that's very important. I would say working with an organization that is doing the screen reader testing, or knowing that you're doing some screen reader testing, is very important to the site as well.
Great. Let's jump on to the next question here from Enlightworks. For US-based businesses, what do you do if the web platform underlying code overlays? What do you do if the web platform's underlying code, even with overlays like Userway and AudioEye installed, do not conform to all the standards such as WCAG level 1?
I can take this, Russ. So I will say that is one of our biggest selling points of why we work so well with platforms, is because we're utilizing DOM manipulation to remediate sites. Now, there's not a platform in the space that is 100% accessible. I will be the first to tell you that. We work with, like I said, tens of thousands of clients on all different types of platforms. And there's not one platform out of the gate that's like, hey, this is fully accessible from a source code. We're working to get there. We're working with a lot of platforms to get there, but it's going to take a lot of time. And then also guidelines are changing. we're going to have to stay up with the times and convince them and continue to progress. As it stands for how do you make sure with something like an AudioEye that it is accessible, or how do you make sure it's there, is we can actually write a remediation over the top of the platform that'll make it accessible. Now, we don't do this with automation, right? We do this with manual intervention as part of our solution. But the more that we learn of the Duda platform, the more we can build automation into this. If there is something certain within the platform as well that you're like, I can't fix this, I know it's an accessibility, I'm sure Russ and the team at Duda have a feedback loop that they work through, because the more that the more that you can adapt and apply those remediations. But I will say for AudioEye, I can't speak for Userway. For AudioEye, we do have that capability to manipulate the DOM to remediate the site to be accessible to the WCAG success criteria. It's one of the big selling points of our solution, and why we have thousands and tens of thousands of clients in with Duda utilizing our solution.
I think the one thing I would add just from the Duda perspective is, there definitely are some platforms that don't meet these guidelines, and no platform will always meet it out of the box, because actually a lot of the kind of the preferences that go into WCAG are just design based. Are you using the right colors? Are you describing your content accurately? Are you using inclusive language? A lot of those things are obviously not really in the realm of Duda. Like for Duda, we try and give you access to the source code. So if you really did want to dig in and make those changes on your own, you can go and do that. And so, we try and follow best practices out of the box and get there, but there are some features and some components of the product that are not, that don't do the best thing for accessibility. And we do try and improve those over time. And it is an ongoing process of saying, okay, great, we have this small problem in our photo gallery. Let's cycle that back into our development cycle and fix that across, all of our websites, whatever it might be. So
absolutely
great. Let's jump on to the next question. Pretty tough one here from Doc. Has there ever been an accessibility lawsuit brought against sites employing AudioEye? Has the AudioEye overlay ever been found to be adequate for compliance in those cases?
Absolutely. So that's a great question, Doc. So in the US, yes, we've had clients that have got hit with a lawsuit. And that's because these lawsuits are filed in thousands. We have mitigated lots of these lawsuits for our clients by utilizing our sustainable testing and remediation plan. We have tons and tons of clients that we can point to that say, look, by utilizing AudioEye and utilizing our sustainable testing and remediation plan, we've been able to mitigate that risk. We've been able to show all the things that we're doing to make a site accessible, show the plan that we have to keep a site accessible across the board. And then on the second part of that question, let me find, has AudioEye overlay found to be adequate for compliance in those cases? Yes, we've never actually gone to court, right? Like no organization has ever said, hey, we're going to take this all the way to decision. But what we have at AudioEye, seen is that a lot of times our mechanisms, our reporting, our sustainable testing and remediation plan has been utilized to show all your plan that you're putting in to make that site accessible. And that's been shown to be adequate. That's been shown to follow the WCAG success criteria and to show the plan that you need. But again, having AudioEye on your site isn't in no technology whatsoever, is not a complete bulletproof solution. But what it does give you is it gives you the plan in place to defend yourself as to what you're doing to make that site accessible, which is the important part to show in any of these cases.
Great, thanks, Ty. Great. So jumping to the next question here from Matt. He's asking, is universal design related to digital accessibility, and how does that work?
Absolutely. I mean, they go hand in hand, right? Like universal design is extremely is extremely important, and it goes hand in hand with accessibility. But I would say it's a big function of universal design, right? Let's look at just either color contrast designing, right? It is something that's going to help all users come. We actually have a course and a white paper at our blog post at AudioEye that talks specifically about this, but they do go hand in hand without going into too much, too much of the details here.
Great. A few questions coming in from Michael here. If my client is sued for accessibility web issues, what does AudioEye Standard or Premium do after the fact?
So this is let's say that a client got sued for digital accessibility and then they come and try to buy AudioEye. There's really not much that we can do besides make sure that going forward that site's accessible. That's why being proactive is just so important. And what I mean by that is that it's kind of like car insurance, right? If I got in a car accident and then I went and tried to go buy car insurance, they're still going to be like, hey, you weren't insured in time of the accident. Going forward, you're look good. Now, for AudioEye and accessibility, you need to have our solution applied, and then we can provide you with our sustainable testing and remediation plan, which is going to help you mitigate that risk. It's not going to completely eliminate that risk. We want to be transparent. But it is going to help mitigate that risk. It's going to give you that plan that you need to apply to and supply to the client. But you have to be proactive. You cannot come in and try to get it after the client's been sued, or else there's really not much that we can do besides on a go forward basis make sure that site's accessible.
Michael's asking, is there a slide deck available to promote to our clients?
Yes. So inside of the platform, I think we have a few digital assets, but we are more than happy to provide anything that you need. Russ and I will talk after this, see what else is available. We can definitely get you a really great pitch deck in one page or so forth to promote to the clients.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have, it's on like our resource center. We have a page where we kind of have some of this documented that you can go and download. But I think they're due for an update, Ty. So we should follow up with that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep.
Great. So one kind of question from my side is, what do you think that the next few years are going to bring for digital accessibility, right? We've really gone through a big change on the web over the past few years, right? The web has seen quite a lot of adoption just due to COVID, and e-commerce has really boomed. I'm curious what if you had to look forward 1 or 2 years, how do you see the kind of accessibility landscape evolving? Do you think it's going to get better? What are new trends that are going to come in? Maybe new technologies that need to be accessible. What are those things that you kind of see, Ty?
Absolutely. I see this on multiple fronts. I think one, we're going to start to learn a lot more about how accessibility helps just the everyday user. I also think that it's going to be something that is a non-negotiable for websites. Right now and in the last 10 years, digital accessibility was something that you gave yourself a gold star when you did it, right? You're like, oh, I make sites accessible. I give myself a gold star. And I think over the next three years, you're going to see that's a foundation, right? It's like having a security on your site. It's a foundational thing. It's no one's going to have a website launch that doesn't have security if you have a login, right? I think that's going to see what you're going to see with digital accessibility. I also think from a guidelines perspective, you're going to have a lot more focus on outcome driven rather than guideline driven. What I mean by that is we're going to be looking at, can people access the sites? What does that use case look like? Which is going to heavily rely on testing. It's going to heavily rely on utilizing software to get you there and making sure. But I think the main thing is it's going to be table stakes for any site that's out there. And I think we're going to see a lot more emphasis on usability rather than litigation and so forth, because it's going to be so mainstream that people are going to start to see the effects of having it mainstream by all users being able to come in and comment or give feedback on what benefits them.
Yeah. One kind of thing I struggle with in accessibility is it's very much a shades of gray conversation, right? Of yes, I'm moving towards accessibility. I'm not going to be 100% compliant because 100% is almost impossible. But how do you recommend kind of having that conversation of great, we're in the 80th percentile versus the 30th percentile of getting there. This is one of the things I struggle with when trying to communicate this of we want to just move it forward, right? We want to do better. It'll never be perfect, but we want to, kind of have that journey. Do you have any tips or recommendations?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of and we see this all the time at AudioEye because we give our clients an accessibility score. So we get to show you your accessibility score before AudioEye, and then your accessibility with that score with AudioEye.
Yeah.
And majority of the time, those accessibility scores with AudioEye are not 100%.
Yep.
And it was kind of like this thing that we needed to say, our clients are going to have a ton of questions about this, but how do we explain to them accessibility is never, it's never a destination. It's always a journey. Never 100%. It's kind of like a credit score in a way. Like you're always striving to get a better credit score. It's kind of how it is with digital accessibility. The advice I have to tell to clients is that it's all about having a plan and showing that you're executing on that plan. One of our biggest features at AudioEye is our sustainable testing and remediation plan that our clients get. And that's because it shows exactly how we're making that site accessibility. It's the transparency. And it shows how we're going to evolve. Because what happens if you make a site accessible, you say you're accessible, all of a sudden the new guidelines roll out. You're going to need to know that those guidelines are now changing. So I would say having the plan, sticking to the plan, and being able to show to an auditor or to a law firm that you're executing on that plan. And then letting your clients know it's never 100%, that it's always evolving, that you're always trying to strive to be better. And that's super important.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Ty. It's a great answer. Thank you for coming in today. We're just over time here. Really excited to bring you in. For everyone here, we'll send up a follow-up recording and send out some of this actual. We'll try and link to that collateral that we mentioned a few minutes ago and that content. So anyone here, thank you again for joining, and Ty, thank you for coming in and presenting. Really thankful for you to share your expertise here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Russ, and thanks everyone for listening in.
All right.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.